Chapter 7. At last, after 3 days of variable winds, we have caught the northeast trades. I came on deck, after a good night's rest in spite of my poor knee, to find the Ghost foaming along, wing and wing, and every sail drawing except the jibs, with a fresh breeze astern. Oh, the wonder of the great trade wind. All day we sailed, and all night, and the next day, and the next, day after day. The wind always astern and blowing steadily and strong. The schooner sailed herself. There was no pulling and hauling on sheets and tackles, no shifting of topsails, no work at all for the sailors to do except to steer. At night, when the sun went down, the sheets were slackened. In the morning, when they yielded up the damp of the dew and relaxed, they were pulled tight again, and that was all. 10 knots, 12 knots, 11 knots, varying from time to time, is the speed we are making. And ever out of the northeast, the brave wind blows, driving us on our course 250 miles between the dawns. It saddens me and gladdens me, the gait with which we are leaving San Francisco behind, and with which we are foaming down upon the tropics. Each day grows perceptibly warmer. In the second dog watch, the sailors come on deck, stripped, and heave buckets of water upon one another from overside. Flying fish are beginning to be seen, and during the night, the watch above scrambles over the deck in pursuit of those that fall aboard. In the morning, Thomas Mugridge being duly bribed, the galley is pleasantly areek with the odor of their frying, while dolphin meat is served fore and aft on such occasions as Johnson catches the blazing beauties from the bowsprit end. Johnson seems to spend all his spare time there, or aloft at the crosstrees, watching the Ghost cleaving the water under press of sail. There is passion, adoration, in his eyes, and he goes about in a sort of trance, gazing in ecstasy at the swelling sails, the foaming wake, and the heave and the run of her over the liquid mountains that are moving with us in stately procession. The days and nights are all a wonder and a wild delight, and though I have little time from my dreary work, I steal odd moments to gaze and gaze at the unending glory of what I never dreamed the world possessed. Above, the sky is stainless blue as the sea itself, which under the forefoot is of the color and sheen of azure satin. All around the horizon are pale, fleecy clouds, never changing, never moving, like a silver setting for the flawless turquoise sky. I do not forget one night, when I should have been asleep, of lying on the forecastle head and gazing down at the spectral ripple of foam thrust aside by the Ghost's forefoot. It sounded like the gurgling of a brook over mossy stones in some quiet dell, and the crooning song of it lured me away and out of myself, till I was no longer Hump the cabin boy, nor Van Weyden, the man who had dreamed away 35 years among books, but a voice behind me, the unmistakable voice of Wolf Larsen, strong with the invincible certitude of the man and mellow with appreciation of the words he was quoting, aroused me. Oh, the blazing tropic night, when the wake's a welt of light that holds the hot sky tame, and the steady forefoot snores through the planet-powdered floors, where the scared whale flukes in flame. Her plates are scarred by the sun, dear lass, and her ropes are taut with the dew, for we're booming down on the old trail, our own trail, the out trail. We're sagging south on the long trail, the trail that is always new. Hump, how's it strike you, he asked, after the due pause, which words and setting demanded. I looked into his face. It was aglow with light as the sea itself, and the eyes were flashing in the starshine. It strikes me as remarkable, to say the least, that you should show enthusiasm. I answered coldly. Why, man, it's living. It's life, he cried, which is a cheap thing and without value. I flung his words at him. He laughed, and it was the first time I had heard honest mirth in his voice. I cannot get you to understand. Cannot drive it into your head. What a thing this life is. Of course, life is valueless, except to itself. And I can tell you that my life is pretty valuable just now to myself. It is beyond price, which you will acknowledge is a terrific overrating, but which I cannot help. For it is the life that is in me that makes the rating. He appeared waiting for the words with which to express the thought that was in him, and finally went on. Do you know, I am filled with a strange uplift. I feel as if all time were echoing through me, as though all powers were mine. I know truth, divine good from evil, right from wrong. My vision is clear and far. I could almost believe in God, but... And his voice changed, and the light went out of his face. What is this condition in which I find myself, this joy of living, this exaltation of life, this inspiration? I may well call it, it is what comes when there is nothing wrong with one's digestion, when his stomach is in trim and his appetite has an edge, and all goes well. It is the bribe for living, the champagne of the blood, the effervescence of the ferment that makes some men think holy thoughts, and other men to see God or to create him when they cannot see him. That is all. The drunkenness of life, the stirring and crawling of the yeast, the babbling of the life that is insane with consciousness that it is alive. And bah, tomorrow I shall pay for it as the drunkard pays. And I shall know that I must die. At sea, most likely. Cease crawling of myself to be all a-crawl with the corruption of the sea, to be fed upon, to be carrion, to yield up all the strength and movement of my muscles that it may become strength and movement in fin and scale and the guts of fishes. Bah, and bah, again. The champagne is already flat. The sparkle and bubble has gone out, and it is a tasteless drink. He left me as suddenly as he had come, springing to the deck with the weight and softness of a tiger. The ghost plowed on her way. I noted the gurgling forefoot was very like a snore, and as I listened to it, the effect of Wolf Larsen's swift rush from sublime exultation to despair slowly left me. Then some deep-water sailor, from the waist of the ship, lifted a rich tenor voice in the song of the trade wind. Oh, I am the wind the seamen love. I am steady and strong and true. They follow my track by the clouds above, o'er the fathomless tropic blue. Through daylight and dark I follow the bark. I keep like a hound on her trail. I'm strongest at noon, yet under the moon I stiffen the bunt of her sail. Chapter 8. Sometimes I think Wolf Larsen mad, or half mad at least. What of his strange moods and vagaries? At other times, I take him for a great man, a genius who has never arrived. And, finally, I am convinced that he is the perfect type of the primitive man, born 1,000 years or generations too late, and an anachronism in this culminating century of civilization. He is certainly an individualist of the most pronounced type. Not only that, but he is very lonely. There is no congeniality between him and the rest of the men aboard ship, His tremendous virility and mental strength wall him apart. They are more like children to him, even the hunters, and as children he treats them, descending perforce to their level and playing with them as a man plays with puppies, or else he probes them with the cruel hand of a vivisectionist, groping about in their mental processes and examining their souls as though to see of what soul stuff is made. I have seen him a score of times, at table, insulting this hunter or that, with cool and level eyes and, withal, a certain air of interest, pondering their actions or replies or petty rages with a curiosity almost laughable to me who stood onlooker and who understood. Concerning his own rages, I am convinced that they are not real, that they are sometimes experiments, but that in the main they are the habits of a pose or attitude he has seen fit to take toward his fellow men. I know, with the possible exception of the incident of the dead mate, that I have not seen him really angry, nor do I wish ever to see him in a genuine rage, when all the force of him is called into play, while on the question of vagaries, I shall tell what befell Thomas Mugridge in the cabin, and at the same time complete an incident upon which I have already touched once or twice. The 12 o'clock dinner was over. One day, and I had just finished putting the cabin in order, when Wolf Larsen and Thomas Mugridge descended the companion stairs. Though the cook had a cubbyhole of a stateroom opening off from the cabin, in the cabin itself he had never dared to linger or to be seen, and he flitted to and fro, once or twice a day, a timid specter. "So you know how to play nap," Wolf Larsen was saying in a pleased sort of voice. "I might have guessed an Englishman would know. I learned it myself in English ships." Thomas Mugridge was beside himself, a blithering imbecile. So pleased was he at chumming thus with the captain. The little airs he put on and the painful striving to assume the easy carriage of a man born to a dignified place in life would have been sickening had they not been ludicrous. He quite ignored my presence, though I credited him with being simply unable to see me. His pale, wishy-washy eyes were swimming like lazy summer seas, though what blissful visions they beheld were beyond my imagination. "Get the cards, Hump," Wolf Larsen ordered, as they took seats at the table, "and bring out the cigars and the whiskey you'll find in my berth." I returned with the articles in time to hear the Cockney hinting broadly that there was a mystery about him, that he might be a gentleman's son gone wrong or something or other. Also, that he was a remittance man and was paid to keep away from England, handsomely. "Sir," was the way he put it, handsomely to sling my ook and keep slinging it. I had brought the customary liquor glasses, but Wolf Larsen frowned, shook his head, and signaled with his hands for me to bring the tumblers. These he filled 2/3 full with undiluted whiskey. "A gentleman's drink," quoth Thomas Mugridge, and they clinked their glasses to the glorious game of nap, lighted cigars, and fell to shuffling and dealing the cards. They played for money. They increased the amounts of the bets. They drank whiskey. They drank it neat. And I fetched more. I do not know whether Wolf Larsen cheated or not, a thing he was thoroughly capable of doing, but he won steadily. The cook made repeated journeys to his bunk for money. Each time he performed the journey with greater swagger, but he never brought more than a few dollars at a time. He grew maudlin, familiar, could hardly see the cards or sit upright. As a preliminary to another journey to his bunk, he hooked Wolf Larsen's buttonhole with a greasy forefinger and vacuously proclaimed and reiterated, "I got money. I got money. I tell yer, and I'm a gentleman's son." Wolf Larsen was unaffected by the drink, yet he drank glass for glass, and if anything his glasses were fuller. There was no change in him. He did not appear even amused at the other's antics. In the end, with loud protestations that he could lose like a gentleman, the cook's last money was staked on the game, and lost, whereupon he leaned his head on his hands and wept. Wolf Larsen looked curiously at him, as though about to probe and vivisect him, then changed his mind, as from the foregone conclusion that there was nothing there to probe. "Hump," he said to me, elaborately polite. "Kindly take Mr. Mugridge's arm and help him up on deck. He is not feeling very well. And tell Johnson to douse him with a few buckets of salt water," he added, in a lower tone for my ear alone. I left Mr. Mugridge on deck, in the hands of a couple of grinning sailors who had been told off for the purpose. Mr. Mugridge was sleepily spluttering that he was a gentleman's son. But as I descended the companion stairs to clear the table, I heard him shriek as the first bucket of water struck him. Wolf Larsen was counting his winnings. $185 even, he said aloud, just as I thought. The beggar came aboard without a cent. "And what you have won is mine, sir," I said boldly. He favored me with a quizzical smile. "Hump. I have studied some grammar in my time, and I think your tenses are tangled. Was mine. You should have said, not is mine. It is a question, not of grammar, but of ethics," I answered. It was possibly a minute before he spoke. "Do you know?" "Hump," he said, with a slow seriousness which had in it an indefinable strain of sadness, "that this is the first time I have heard the word ethics in the mouth of a man. You and I are the only men on this ship who know its meaning. At one time in my life," he continued, after another pause, "I dreamed that I might someday talk with men who used such language, that I might lift myself out of the place in life in which I had been born, and hold conversation and mingle with men who talked about just such things as ethics. And this is the first time I have ever heard the word pronounced, which is all by the way, for you are wrong. It is a question neither of grammar nor ethics, but of fact." "I understand," I said. "The fact is that you have the money." His face brightened. He seemed pleased at my perspicacity. "But it is avoiding the real question," I continued, "which is one of right." "Ah," he remarked, with a wry pucker of his mouth, "I see you still believe in such things as right and wrong." "But don't you at all?" I demanded. "Not the least bit. Might is right, and that is all there is to it. Weakness is wrong, which is a very poor way of saying that it is good for oneself to be strong, and evil for oneself to be weak, or better yet. It is pleasurable to be strong, because of the profits, painful to be weak, because of the penalties. Just now the possession of this money is a pleasurable thing. It is good for one to possess it. Being able to possess it, I wrong myself and the life that is in me if I give it to you and forego the pleasure of possessing it." "But you wrong me by withholding it," I objected. "Not at all. One man cannot wrong another man. He can only wrong himself. As I see it, I do wrong always when I consider the interests of others. Don't you see? How can two particles of the yeast wrong each other by striving to devour each other? It is their inborn heritage to strive to devour and to strive not to be devoured. When they depart from this, they sin. Then you don't believe in altruism, I asked. He received the word as if it had a familiar ring, though he pondered it thoughtfully. Let me see. It means something about cooperation, doesn't it? Well, in a way, there has come to be a sort of connection. I answered, unsurprised by this time at such gaps in his vocabulary, which, like his knowledge, was the acquirement of a self-read, self-educated man, whom no one had directed in his studies, and who had thought much and talked little or not at all. An altruistic act is an act performed for the welfare of others. It is unselfish, as opposed to an act performed for self, which is selfish. He nodded his head. Oh, yes, I remember it now. I ran across it in Spencer. Spencer, I cried, have you read him? Not very much, was his confession. I understood quite a good deal of first principles, but his biology took the wind out of my sails, and his psychology left me butting around in the doldrums for many a day. I honestly could not understand what he was driving at. I put it down to mental deficiency on my part. But since then, I have decided that it was for want of preparation. I had no proper basis. Only Spencer and myself know how hard I hammered. But I did get something out of his data of ethics. There's where I ran across altruism, and I remember now how it was used. I wondered what this man could have got from such a work. Spencer, I remembered enough to know that altruism was imperative to his ideal of highest conduct. Wolf Larsen, evidently, had sifted the great philosopher's teachings, rejecting and selecting according to his needs and desires. What else did you run across, I asked. His brows drew in slightly with the mental effort of suitably phrasing thoughts which he had never before put into speech. I felt an elation of spirit. I was groping into his soul stuff as he made a practice of groping in the soul stuff of others. I was exploring virgin territory, a terribly strange region was unrolling itself before my eyes. In as few words as possible, he began. Spencer puts it something like this. First, a man must act for his own benefit. To do this is to be moral and good. Next, he must act for the benefit of his children. And third, he must act for the benefit of his race. And the highest, finest, right conduct, I interjected, is that act which benefits at the same time the man, his children, and his race. I wouldn't stand for that, he replied. Couldn't see the necessity for it, nor the common sense. I cut out the race and the children. I would sacrifice nothing for them. It's just so much slush and sentiment, and you must see it yourself, at least for one who does not believe in eternal life. With immortality before me, altruism would be a paying business proposition. I might elevate my soul to all kinds of altitudes, but with nothing eternal before me but death, given for a brief spell this yeasty crawling and squirming which is called life, why, it would be immoral for me to perform any act that was a sacrifice. Any sacrifice that makes me lose one crawl or squirm is foolish, and not only foolish, for it is a wrong against myself and a wicked thing. I must not lose one crawl or squirm if I am to get the most out of the ferment, nor will the eternal movelessness that is coming to me be made easier or harder by the sacrifices or selfishnesses of the time when I was yeasty and a crawl. Then you are an individualist, a materialist, and, logically, a hedonist. Big words. He smiled. But what is a hedonist? He nodded agreement when I had given the definition. And you are also, I continued, a man one could not trust in the least thing where it was possible for a selfish interest to intervene. Now you're beginning to understand, he said, brightening. You are a man utterly without what the world calls morals. That's it. A man of whom to be always afraid. That's the way to put it. As one is afraid of a snake, or a tiger, or a shark. Now you know me, he said, and you know me as I am generally known. Other men call me Wolf. You are a sort of monster, I added audaciously, a Caliban who has pondered Setebos, and who acts as you act, in idle moments, by whim and fancy. His brow clouded at the allusion. He did not understand, and I quickly learned that he did not know the poem. I'm just reading Browning, he confessed, and it's pretty tough. I haven't got very far along, and as it is, I've about lost my bearings. Not to be tiresome, I shall say that I fetched the book from his stateroom and read Caliban aloud. He was delighted. It was a primitive mode of reasoning, and of looking at things that he understood thoroughly. He interrupted again and again with comment and criticism. When I finished, he had me read it over a second time, and a third. We fell into discussion philosophy, science, evolution, religion. He betrayed the inaccuracies of the self-read man, and, it must be granted, the sureness and directness of the primitive mind. The very simplicity of his reasoning was its strength, and his materialism was far more compelling than the subtly complex materialism of Charlie Furuseth. Not that I confirmed, and, as Furuseth phrased it, a temperamental idealist was to be compelled, but that Wolf Larsen stormed the last strongholds of my faith with a vigor that received respect, while not accorded conviction. Time passed. Supper was at hand, and the table not laid. I became restless and anxious. And when Thomas Mugridge glared down the companionway, sick and angry of countenance, I prepared to go about my duties. But Wolf Larsen cried out to him, "Cookie, you've got to hustle tonight. I'm busy with Hump, and you'll do the best you can without him." And again, the unprecedented was established. That night, I sat at table with the captain and the hunters, while Thomas Mugridge waited on us and washed the dishes afterward a whim. A Caliban mood of Wolf Larsen's, and one I foresaw would bring me trouble. In the meantime, we talked and talked, much to the disgust of the hunters, who could not understand a word. Chapter 9. 3 days of rest, 3 blessed days of rest, are what I had with Wolf Larsen, eating at the cabin table and doing nothing but discuss life, literature, and the universe. The while Thomas Mugridge fumed and raged and did my work as well as his own. Watch out for squalls, is all I can say to you, was Lewis's warning, given during a spare half-hour on deck while Wolf Larsen was engaged in straightening out a row among the hunters. You can't tell what'll be happening, Lewis went on, in response to my query for more definite information. The man's as contrary as air currents or water currents. You can never guess the ways of him. 'Tis just as you're thinking you know him and are making a favorable slant along him, that he whirls around, dead ahead and comes howling down upon you, and a rippin' all of your fine weather sails to rags. So I was not altogether surprised when the squall foretold by Louis smote me. We had been having a heated discussion upon life, of course, and, grown overbold, I was passing stiff strictures upon Wolf Larsen and the life of Wolf Larsen. In fact, I was vivisecting him and turning over his soul stuff as keenly and thoroughly as it was his custom to do it to others. It may be a weakness of mine that I have an incisive way of speech, but I threw all restraint to the winds and cut and slashed until the whole man of him was snarling. The dark sun bronze of his face went black with wrath. His eyes were ablaze. There was no clearness or sanity in them, nothing but the terrific rage of a madman. It was the wolf in him that I saw, and a mad wolf at that. He sprang for me with a half-roar, gripping my arm. I had steeled myself to brazen it out, though I was trembling inwardly, but the enormous strength of the man was too much for my fortitude. He had gripped me by the biceps with his single hand, and when that grip tightened, I wilted and shrieked aloud. My feet went out from under me. I simply could not stand upright and endure the agony. The muscles refused their duty. The pain was too great. My biceps was being crushed to a pulp. He seemed to recover himself, for a lucid gleam came into his eyes, and he relaxed his hold with a short laugh that was more like a growl. I fell to the floor, feeling very faint, while he sat down, lighted a cigar, and watched me as a cat watches a mouse. As I writhed about, I could see in his eyes that curiosity I had so often noted, that wonder and perplexity, that questing, that everlasting query of his as to what it was all about. I finally crawled to my feet and ascended the companion stairs. Fair weather was over, and there was nothing left but to return to the galley. My left arm was numb, as though paralyzed, and days passed before I could use it, while weeks went by before the last stiffness and pain went out of it. And he had done nothing but put his hand upon my arm and squeeze. There had been no wrenching or jerking. He had just closed his hand with a steady pressure. What he might have done, I did not fully realize till next day, when he put his head into the galley and, as a sign of renewed friendliness, asked me how my arm was getting on. It might have been worse, he smiled. I was peeling potatoes. He picked one up from the pan. It was fair-sized, firm, and unpeeled. He closed his hand upon it, squeezed, and the potato squirted out between his fingers in mushy streams. The pulpy remnant he dropped back into the pan and turned away, and I had a sharp vision of how it might have fared with me had the monster put his real strength upon me. But the 3 days' rest was good in spite of it all, for it had given my knee the very chance it needed. It felt much better. The swelling had materially decreased, and the cap seemed descending into its proper place. Also, the 3 days' rest brought the trouble I had foreseen. It was plainly Thomas Mugridge's intention to make me pay for those 3 days. He treated me vilely, cursed me continually, and heaped his own work upon me. He even ventured to raise his fist to me, but I was becoming animal-like myself, and I snarled in his face so terribly that it must have frightened him back. It is no pleasant picture I can conjure up of myself, Humphrey van Weyden, in that noisome ship's galley, crouched in a corner over my task, my face raised to the face of the creature about to strike me, my lips lifted and snarling like a dog's, my eyes gleaming with fear and helplessness, and the courage that comes of fear and helplessness. I do not like the picture. It reminds me too strongly of a rat in a trap. I do not care to think of it, but it was elective, for the threatened blow did not descend. Thomas Mugridge backed away, glaring as hatefully and viciously as I glared. A pair of beasts is what we were, penned together and showing our teeth. He was a coward, afraid to strike me because I had not quailed sufficiently in advance, so he chose a new way to intimidate me. There was only one galley knife that, as a knife, amounted to anything. This, through many years of service and wear, had acquired a long, lean blade. It was unusually cruel looking, and at first I had shuddered every time I used it. The cook borrowed a stone from Johansen and proceeded to sharpen the knife. He did it with great ostentation, glancing significantly at me the while. He whetted it up and down all day long. Every odd moment he could find, he had the knife and stone out and was whetting away. The steel acquired a razor edge. He tried it with the ball of his thumb or across the nail. He shaved hairs from the back of his hand, glanced along the edge with microscopic acuteness, and found, or feigned that he found, always, a slight inequality in its edge somewhere. Then he would put it on the stone again and wet, till I could have laughed aloud. It was so very ludicrous. It was also serious, for I learned that he was capable of using it, that under all his cowardice, there was a courage of cowardice, like mine, that would impel him to do the very thing his whole nature protested against doing and was afraid of doing. Cookie's sharpening his knife for Hump was being whispered about among the sailors, and some of them twitted him about it. This he took in good part, and was really pleased, nodding his head with direful foreknowledge and mystery, until George Leach, the erstwhile cabin boy, ventured some rough pleasantry on the subject. Now it happened that Leach was one of the sailors told off to douse Mugridge after his game of cards with the captain. Leach had evidently done his task with a thoroughness that Mugridge had not forgiven, for words followed and evil names involving smirched ancestries. Mugridge menaced with the knife he was sharpening for me. Leach laughed and hurled more of his Telegraph Hill Billingsgate. And before either he or I knew what had happened, his right arm had been ripped open from elbow to wrist by a quick slash of the knife. The cook backed away, a fiendish expression on his face, the knife held before him in a position of defense. But Leach took it quite calmly, though blood was spouting upon the deck as generously as water from a fountain. "I'm going to get you, Cookie," he said, "and I'll get you hard, and I won't be in no hurry about it. You'll be without that knife when I come for you." So saying, he turned and walked quietly forward. Mugridge's face was livid with fear at what he had done and at what he might expect sooner or later from the man he had stabbed. But his demeanor toward me was more ferocious than ever. In spite of his fear at the reckoning, he must expect to pay for what he had done. He could see that it had been an object lesson to me, and he became more domineering and exultant. Also, there was a lust in him, akin to madness, which had come with sight of the blood he had drawn. He was beginning to see red in whatever direction he looked. The psychology of it is sadly tangled, and yet I could read the workings of his mind as clearly as though it were a printed book. Several days went by, the ghost still foaming down the trades, and I could swear I saw madness growing in Thomas Mugridge's eyes, and I confess that I became afraid, very much afraid. Wet, Wet, wet. It went all day long. The look in his eyes as he felt the keen edge and glared at me was positively carnivorous. I was afraid to turn my shoulder to him, and when I left the galley I went out backwards to the amusement of the sailors and hunters, who made a point of gathering in groups to witness my exit. The strain was too great. I sometimes thought my mind would give way under it, a meat thing on this ship of madmen and brutes. Every hour, every minute of my existence was in jeopardy. I was a human soul in distress, and yet no soul, fore or aft, betrayed sufficient sympathy to come to my aid. At times I thought of throwing myself on the mercy of Wolf Larsen, but the vision of the mocking devil in his eyes that questioned life and sneered at it would come strong upon me and compel me to refrain. At other times, I seriously contemplated suicide, and the whole force of my hopeful philosophy was required to keep me from going over the side in the darkness of night. Several times, Wolf Larsen tried to inveigle me into discussion, but I gave him short answers and eluded him. Finally, he commanded me to resume my seat at the cabin table for a time and let the cook do my work. Then I spoke frankly, telling him what I was enduring from Thomas Mugridge because of the 3 days of favoritism which had been shown me. Wolf Larsen regarded me with smiling eyes. "So you're afraid?" He sneered. "Yes," I said defiantly and honestly. "I am afraid." "That's the way with you fellows," he cried, half angrily. "Sentimentalizing about your immortal souls and afraid to die. At sight of a sharp knife and a cowardly cockney, the clinging of life to life overcomes all your fond foolishness. Why, my dear fellow, you will live forever. You are a god, and God cannot be killed. Cookie cannot hurt you. You are sure of your resurrection. What's there to be afraid of? You have eternal life before you. You are a millionaire in immortality, and a millionaire whose fortune cannot be lost, whose fortune is less perishable than the stars and as lasting as space or time. It is impossible for you to diminish your principle. Immortality is a thing without beginning or end. Eternity is eternity. And though you die here and now, you will go on living somewhere else and hereafter. And it is all very beautiful. This shaking off of the flesh and soaring of the imprisoned spirit. Cookie cannot hurt you. He can only give you a boost on the path you eternally must tread. Or, if you do not wish to be boosted just yet, why not boost Cookie? According to your ideas, he, too, must be an immortal millionaire. You cannot bankrupt him. His paper will always circulate at par. You cannot diminish the length of his living by killing him, for he is without beginning or end. He's bound to go on living. Somewhere. Somehow. Then boost him. Stick a knife in him and let his spirit free. As it is, it's in a nasty prison, and you'll do him only a kindness by breaking down the door. And who knows, it may be a very beautiful spirit that will go soaring up into the blue from that ugly carcass. Boost him along, and I'll promote you to his place. And he's getting $45 a month. It was plain that I could look for no help or mercy from Wolf Larsen. Whatever was to be done, I must do for myself, and out of the courage of fear, I evolved the plan of fighting Thomas Mugridge with his own weapons. I borrowed a whetstone from Johansen. Louis, the boat steerer, had already begged me for condensed milk and sugar. The lazarette, where such delicacies were stored, was situated beneath the cabin floor. Watching my chance, I stole 5 cans of the milk And that night, when it was Lewis's watch on deck, I traded them with him for a dirk as lean and cruel-looking as Thomas Mugridge's vegetable knife. It was rusty and dull, but I turned the grindstone while Louis gave it an edge. I slept more soundly than usual that night. Next morning, after breakfast, Thomas Mugridge began his wet. I glanced warily at him, for I was on my knees taking the ashes from the stove. When I returned from throwing them overside, he was talking to Harrison, whose honest yokel's face was filled with fascination and wonder. "Yes," Mugridge was saying, "and what does his worship do but give me 2 years in Reading? But blimey if I cared. The other mug was fixed plenty. Should have seen him. Knife just like this. I stuck it in, like into soft butter, and the wee he squealed was better in a 2-penny gaff." He shot a glance in my direction to see if I was taking it in, and went on. "I didn't mean it, Tommy." He was sniffling. "So help me God, I didn't mean it. I'll fix your bloody well right," I says, and kept right after him. I cut him in ribbons. That's what I did, and he a squealing all the time. Once he got his and on the knife and tried to hold it. Had his fingers around it, but I pulled it through, cut into the bone. Oh, he was a sight. I can tell yer. A call from the mate interrupted the gory narrative, and Harrison went aft. Mugridge sat down on the raised threshold to the galley and went on with his knife sharpening. I put the shovel away and calmly sat down on the coal box facing him. He favored me with a vicious stare, still calmly, though my heart was going pit-a-pat. I pulled out Lewis's dirk and began to wet it on the stone. I had looked for almost any sort of explosion on the Cockney's part, but to my surprise, he did not appear aware of what I was doing. He went on wetting his knife. So did I. And for 2 hours, we sat there, face to face, wet, till the news of it spread abroad, and half the ship's company was crowding the galley doors to see the sight. Encouragement and advice were freely tendered, and Jock Horner, the quiet, self-spoken hunter who looked as though he would not harm a mouse, advised me to leave the ribs alone and to thrust upward for the abdomen, at the same time giving what he called the Spanish twist to the blade. Leach, his bandaged arm prominently to the fore, begged me to leave a few remnants of the cook for him, and Wolf Larsen paused once or twice at the break of the poop to glance curiously at what must have been to him a stirring and crawling of the yeasty thing he knew as life. And I make free to say that for the time being, life assumed the same sordid values to me. There was nothing pretty about it, nothing divine, only 2 cowardly moving things that sat whetting steel upon stone, and a group of other moving things, cowardly and otherwise, that looked on. Half of them, I am sure, were anxious to see us shedding each other's blood. It would have been entertainment, and I do not think there was one who would have interfered had we closed in a death struggle. On the other hand, the whole thing was laughable and childish. Wet. Humphrey van Weyden sharpening his knife in a ship's galley and trying its edge with his thumb. Of all situations, this was the most inconceivable. I know that my own kind could not have believed it possible. I had not been called Sissy Van Weyden all my days without reason. And that Sissy Van Weyden should be capable of doing this thing was a revelation to Humphrey van Weyden, who knew not whether to be exultant or ashamed. But nothing happened. At the end of 2 hours, Thomas Mugridge put away knife and stone and held out his hand. "What's the good of making a 'oly show of ourselves for them mugs?" he demanded. "They don't love us, and bloody well glad they'd be a-seein' us cuttin' our throats. You're not arf bad. You've got spunk, as you Yanks see, and I like your in a why. So come on and shike." Coward that I might be, I was less a coward than he. It was a distinct victory I had gained, and I refused to forego any of it by shaking his detestable hand. "All right," he said pridelessly. "Take it or leave it. I'll like you none the less for it." And to save his face, he turned fiercely upon the onlookers. "Get out of my galley doors, you bloomin' swabs." This command was reinforced by a steaming kettle of water, and at sight of it, the sailors scrambled out of the way. This was a sort of victory for Thomas Mugridge, and enabled him to accept more gracefully the defeat I had given him, though, of course, he was too discreet to attempt to drive the hunters away. "I see Cookie's finish," I heard Smoke say to Horner. "You bet," was the reply. "Hump runs the galley from now on, and Cookie pulls in his horns." Mugridge heard and shot a swift glance at me, but I gave no sign that the conversation had reached me. I had not thought my victory was so far-reaching and complete, but I resolved to let go nothing I had gained. As the days went by, Smoke's prophecy was verified. The Cockney became more humble and slavish to me than even to Wolf Larsen. I mistered him and served him no longer, washed no more greasy pots, and peeled no more potatoes. I did my own work, and my own work only, and when and in what fashion I saw fit. Also, I carried the dirk in a sheath at my hip, sailor fashion, and maintained toward Thomas Mugridge a constant attitude which was composed of equal parts of domineering, insult, and contempt. Chapter 10. My intimacy with Wolf Larsen increases, if by intimacy may be denoted those relations which exist between master and man, or better yet, between king and jester. I am to him no more than a toy, and he values me no more than a child values a toy. My function is to amuse, and so long as I amuse, all goes well. But let him become bored, or let him have one of his black moods come upon him, and at once I am relegated from cabin table to galley, while, at the same time, I am fortunate to escape with my life and a whole body. The loneliness of the man is slowly being borne in upon me. There is not a man aboard but hates or fears him, nor is there a man whom he does not despise. He seems consuming with the tremendous power that is in him, and that seems never to have found adequate expression in works. He is as Lucifer would be, were that proud spirit banished to a society of soulless, Tomlinsonian ghosts. This loneliness is bad enough in itself, but, to make it worse, he is oppressed by the primal melancholy of the race. Knowing him, I review the old Scandinavian myths with clearer understanding. The white-skinned, fair-haired savages who created that terrible pantheon were of the same fiber as he. The frivolity of the laughter-loving Latins is no part of him. When he laughs, it is from a humor that is nothing else than ferocious. But he laughs rarely. He is too often sad, and it is a sadness as deep-reaching as the roots of the race. It is the race heritage, the sadness which has made the race sober-minded, clean-lived, and fanatically moral, and which, in this latter connection, has culminated among the English in the Reformed Church, and Mrs. Grundy. In point of fact, the chief vent to this primal melancholy has been religion in its more agonizing forms. But the compensations of such religion are denied Wolf Larsen. His brutal materialism will not permit it. So, when his blue moods come on, nothing remains for him but to be devilish. Were he not so terrible a man, I could sometimes feel sorry for him, as instanced 3 mornings ago, when I went into his stateroom to fill his water bottle and came unexpectedly upon him. He did not see me. His head was buried in his hands, and his shoulders were heaving convulsively as with sobs. He seemed torn by some mighty grief. As I softly withdrew, I could hear him groaning. God, 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 not that he was calling upon God. It was a mere expletive, but it came from his soul. At dinner, he asked the hunters for a remedy for headache, and by evening, strong man that he was half blind and reeling about the cabin. I've never been sick in my life. Hump, he said, as I guided him to his room. Nor did I ever have a headache, except the time my head was healing after having been laid open for 6 inches by a capstan bar. For 3 days this blinding headache lasted, and he suffered as wild animals suffer, as it seemed the way on ship to suffer, without plaint, without sympathy, utterly alone. This morning, however, on entering his stateroom to make the bed and put things in order, I found him well and hard at work. Table and bunk were littered with designs and calculations. On a large transparent sheet, compass and square in hand, he was copying what appeared to be a scale of some sort or other. Hello? He greeted me genially. I'm just finishing the finishing touches. Want to see it work? But what is it, I asked? A labor-saving device for mariners. Navigation reduced to kindergarten simplicity, he answered gaily. From today, a child will be able to navigate a ship. No more long-winded calculations. All you need is 1 star in the sky on a dirty night to know instantly where you are. Look. I placed the transparent scale on this star map, revolving the scale on the North Pole. On the scale, I've worked out the circles of altitude and the lines of bearing. All I do is to put it on a star, revolve the scale till it is opposite those figures on the map underneath. And presto, there you are, the ship's precise location. There was a ring of triumph in his voice, and his eyes, clear blue this morning as the sea, were sparkling with light. You must be well up in mathematics, I said. Where did you go to school? Never saw the inside of one. Worse luck, was the answer. I had to dig it out for myself. And why do you think I have made this thing, he demanded. Abruptly, dreaming to leave footprints on the sands of time, he laughed one of his horrible mocking laughs. Not at all. To get it patented, to make money from it, to revel in piggishness with all night in while other men do the work. That's my purpose. Also, I have enjoyed working it out. The creative joy, I murmured. I guess that's what it ought to be called, which is another way of expressing the joy of life in that it is alive, the triumph of movement over matter, of the quick over the dead, the pride of the yeast, because it is yeast and crawls. I threw up my hands with helpless disapproval of his inveterate materialism and went about making the bed. He continued copying lines and figures upon the transparent scale. It was a task requiring the utmost nicety and precision, and I could not but admire the way he tempered his strength to the fineness and delicacy of the need. When I had finished the bed, I caught myself looking at him in a fascinated sort of way. He was certainly a handsome man, beautiful in the masculine sense, and again, with never-failing wonder. I remarked the total lack of viciousness, or wickedness, or sinfulness in his face. It was the face, I am convinced, of a man who did no wrong, and by this I do not wish to be misunderstood. What I mean is that it was the face of a man who either did nothing contrary to the dictates of his conscience, or who had no conscience. I am inclined to the latter way of accounting for it. He was a magnificent atavism, a man so purely primitive that he was of the type that came into the world before the development of the moral nature. He was not immoral, but merely unmoral. As I have said, in the masculine sense, his was a beautiful face, smooth-shaven. Every line was distinct, and it was cut as clear and sharp as a cameo, while sea and sun had tanned the naturally fair skin to a dark bronze which bespoke struggle and battle, and added both to his savagery and his beauty. The lips were full, yet possessed of the firmness, almost harshness, which is characteristic of thin lips. The set of his mouth, his chin, his jaw, was likewise firm or harsh, with all the fierceness and indomitableness of the male the nose also. It was the nose of a being born to conquer and command. It just hinted of the eagle beak. It might have been Grecian. It might have been Roman. Only it was a shade too massive for the one, a shade too delicate for the other. And while the whole face was the incarnation of fierceness and strength, the primal melancholy from which he suffered seemed to greaten the lines of mouth and eye and brow, seemed to give a largeness and completeness which otherwise the face would have lacked. And so I caught myself standing idly and studying him. I cannot say how greatly the man had come to interest me. Who was he? What was he? How had he happened to be? All powers seemed his. All potentialities, why, then, was he no more than the obscure master of a seal-hunting schooner with a reputation for frightful brutality amongst the men who hunted seals? My curiosity burst from me in a flood of speech. Why is it that you have not done great things in this world? With the power that is yours, you might have risen to any height. Unpossessed of conscience or moral instinct, you might have mastered the world, broken it to your hand. And yet, here you are, at the top of your life, where diminishing and dying begin, living an obscure and sordid existence, hunting sea animals for the satisfaction of woman's vanity and love of decoration, reveling in a piggishness, to use your own words, which is anything and everything except splendid. Why, with all that wonderful strength, have you not done something? There was nothing to stop you, nothing that could stop you. What was wrong? Did you lack ambition? Did you fall under temptation? What was the matter? What was the matter? He had lifted his eyes to me at the commencement of my outburst, and followed me complacently until I had done and stood before him breathless and dismayed. He waited a moment, as though seeking where to begin, and then said, Do you know the parable of the sower who went forth to sow? If you will remember, some of the seed fell upon stony places, where there was not much earth, and forthwith they sprung up, because they had no deepness of earth. And when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them. Well, I said. Well, he queried, half petulantly, It was not well. I was one of those seeds. He dropped his head to the scale and resumed the copying. I finished my work and had opened the door to leave when he spoke to me. Hump. If you will look on the west coast of the map of Norway, you will see an indentation called Romsdal Fjord. I was born within 100 miles of that stretch of water, but I was not born Norwegian. I am a Dane. My father and mother were Danes, and how they ever came to that bleak bite of land on the west coast, I do not know. I never heard. Outside of that, there is nothing mysterious. They were poor people and unlettered. They came of generations of poor, unlettered people, peasants of the sea who sowed their sons on the waves, as has been their custom since time began. There is no more to tell. But there is, I objected. It is still obscure to me. What can I tell you, he demanded, with a recrudescence of fierceness, of the meagerness of a child's life of fish diet and coarse living of going out with the boats from the time I could crawl of my brothers, who went away one by one to the deep sea farming and never came back of myself, unable to read or write, cabin boy at the mature age of 10 on the coastwise, old country ships of the rough fare and rougher usage, where kicks and blows were bed and breakfast and took the place of speech, and fear and hatred and pain were my only soul experiences I do not care to remember. A madness comes up in my brain even now as I think of it. But there were coastwise skippers I would have returned and killed when a man's strength came to me. Only the lines of my life were cast at the time in other places. I did return, not long ago. But unfortunately, the skippers were dead. All but one. A mate in the old days. A skipper when I met him. And when I left him a cripple who would never walk again. But you who read Spencer and Darwin and have never seen the inside of a school, how did you learn to read and write? I queried. In the English merchant service, cabin boy at 12, ship's boy at 14, ordinary seaman at 16, able seaman at 17, and cock of the forecastle, infinite ambition and infinite loneliness, receiving neither help nor sympathy. I did it all for myself. Navigation, mathematics, science, literature, and what not. And of what use has it been master and owner of a ship at the top of my life, as you say, when I am beginning to diminish and die? Paltry, isn't it? And when the sun was up, I was scorched, and because I had no root, I withered away. But history tells of slaves who rose to the purple, I chided. And history tells of opportunities that came to the slaves who rose to the purple. He answered grimly, no man makes opportunity. All the great men ever did was to know it when it came to them. The Corsican knew. I have dreamed as greatly as the Corsican. I should have known the opportunity, but it never came. The thorns sprung up and choked me. And hump. I can tell you that you know more about me than any living man, except my own brother. And what is he? And where is he? Master of the steamship Macedonia. Seal hunter, was the answer. We will meet him most probably on the Japan coast. Men call him Death Larsen. Death Larsen, I involuntarily cried. Is he like you? Hardly. He is a lump of an animal without any head. He has all my brutishness, I suggested. Yes, thank you for the word. All my brutishness. But he can scarcely read or write. And he has never philosophized on life, I added. No. Wolf Larsen answered, with an indescribable air of sadness. And he is all the happier for leaving life alone. He is too busy living it to think about it. My mistake was in ever opening the books. Chapter 11. The ghost has attained the southernmost point of the arc she is describing across the Pacific, and is already beginning to edge away to the west and north towards some lone island. It is rumored, where she will fill her water casks before proceeding to the season's hunt along the coast of Japan. The hunters have experimented and practiced with their rifles and shotguns till they are satisfied, and the boat pullers and steerers have made their spritsails, bound the oars and rowlocks in leather and sennet so that they will make no noise when creeping on the seals, and put their boats in apple pie order, to use Leech's homely phrase. His arm, by the way, has healed nicely, though the scar will remain all his life. Thomas Mugridge lives in mortal fear of him, and is afraid to venture on deck after dark. There are 2 or 3 standing quarrels in the forecastle. Louis tells me that the gossip of the sailors finds its way aft, and that 2 of the telltales have been badly beaten by their mates. He shakes his head dubiously over the outlook for the man Johnson, who is boat puller in the same boat with him. Johnson has been guilty of speaking his mind too freely, and has collided 2 or 3 times with Wolf Larsen over the pronunciation of his name. Johansen. He thrashed on the amidships deck the other night, since which time the mate has called him by his proper name. But of course it is out of the question that Johnson should thrash Wolf Larsen. Louis has also given me additional information about Death Larsen, which tallies with the captain's brief description. We may expect to meet Death Larsen on the Japan coast, and look out for squalls, is Lewis's prophecy, for they hate one another like the wolf whelps they are. Death Larsen is in command of the only sealing steamer in the fleet, the Macedonia, which carries 14 boats, whereas the rest of the schooners carry only 6. There is wild talk of cannon aboard, and of strange raids and expeditions she may make, ranging from opium smuggling into the States and arms smuggling into China, to blackbirding and open piracy. Yet I cannot but believe, for I have never yet caught him in a lie, while he has a cyclopedic knowledge of sealing and the men of the sealing fleets. As it is forward and in the galley, so it is in the steerage and aft, on this veritable hell ship. Men fight and struggle ferociously for one another's lives. The hunters are looking for a shooting scrape at any moment between Smoke and Henderson, whose old quarrel has not healed, while Wolf Larsen says positively that he will kill the survivor of the affair, if such affair comes off. He frankly states that the position he takes is based on no moral grounds, that all the hunters could kill and eat one another so far as he is concerned, were it not that he needs them alive for the hunting, if they will only hold their hands until the season is over. He promises them a royal carnival, when all grudges can be settled, and the survivors may toss the non-survivors overboard and arrange a story as to how the missing men were lost at sea. I think even the hunters are appalled at his cold-bloodedness. Wicked men though they be, they are certainly very much afraid of him. Thomas Mugridge is cur-like in his subjection to me, while I go about in secret dread of him. His is the courage of fear, a strange thing I know well of myself, and at any moment it may master the fear and impel him to the taking of my life. My knee is much better, though it often aches for long periods, and the stiffness is gradually leaving the arm which Wolf Larsen squeezed. Otherwise, I am in splendid condition, feel that I am in splendid condition. My muscles are growing harder and increasing in size. My hands, however, are a spectacle for grief. They have a parboiled appearance, are afflicted with hangnails, while the nails are broken and discolored, and the edges of the quick seem to be assuming a fungoid sort of growth. Also, I am suffering from boils, due to the diet, most likely, for I was never afflicted in this manner before. I was amused, a couple of evenings back, by seeing Wolf Larsen reading the Bible, a copy of which, after the futile search for one at the beginning of the voyage, had been found in the dead mate's sea chest. I wondered what Wolf Larsen could get from it, and he read aloud to me from Ecclesiastes. I could imagine he was speaking the thoughts of his own mind as he read to me, and his voice, reverberating deeply and mournfully in the confined cabin, charmed and held me. He may be uneducated, but he certainly knows how to express the significance of the written word. I can hear him now, as I shall always hear him. The primal melancholy vibrant in his voice as he read, "I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasure of kings and of the provinces. I gate me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men, as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. So I was great, and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom returned with me. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. All things come alike to all. There is one event to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good and to the clean, and to the unclean, to him that sacrificeth, and to him that sacrificeth not. As is the good, so is the sinner, and he that sweareth, as he that feareth an oath. This is an evil among all things that are done under the sun, that there is one event unto all. Yea, also the heart of the sons of men is full of evil, and madness is in their heart while they live, and after that they go to the dead. For to him that is joined to all the living there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more a reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love, and their hatred, and their envy is now perished. Neither have they any more a portion forever in anything that is done under the sun. There you have it. Hump, he said, closing the book upon his finger and looking up at me. The preacher who was king over Israel in Jerusalem thought as I think. You call me a pessimist. Is not this pessimism of the blackest, all is vanity and vexation of spirit? There is no profit under the sun. There is one event unto all. To the fool and the wise, the clean and the unclean, the sinner and the saint, and that event is death, and an evil thing. He says, for the preacher loved life, and did not want to die, saying, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. He preferred the vanity and vexation to the silence and unmovableness of the grave. And so to crawl is piggish, but to not crawl, to be as the clod and rock, is loathsome to contemplate. It is loathsome to the life that is in me, the very essence of which is movement, the power of movement, and the consciousness of the power of movement. Life itself is unsatisfaction, but to look ahead to death is greater unsatisfaction. You are worse off than Omar, I said. He, at least, after the customary agonizing of youth, found content and made of his materialism a joyous thing. Who was Omar Wolf Larsen asked, and I did no more work that day, nor the next, nor the next. In his random reading, he had never chanced upon the Rubaiyat, and it was to him like a great find of treasure. Much I remembered, possibly 2/3 of the quatrains, and I managed to piece out the remainder without difficulty. We talked for hours over single stanzas, and I found him reading into them a wail of regret and a rebellion which, for the life of me, I could not discover myself. Possibly I recited with a certain joyous lilt which was my own, for his memory was good, and at a second rendering, very often the first, he made a quatrain his own. He recited the same lines and invested them with an unrest and passionate revolt that was well nigh convincing. I was interested as to which quatrain he would like best, and was not surprised when he hit upon the one born of an instant's irritability, and quite at variance with the Persian's complacent philosophy and genial code of life. What, without asking, hither hurried whence, and, without asking, whither hurried hence. Oh, many a cup of this forbidden wine must drown the memory of that insolence. Great Wolf Larsen cried, great. That's the keynote. Insolence. He could not have used a better word. In vain I objected and denied. He deluged me, overwhelmed me with argument. It's not the nature of life to be otherwise. Life, when it knows that it must cease living, will always rebel. It cannot help itself. The preacher found life and the works of life all of vanity and vexation, an evil thing. But death, the ceasing to be able to be vain and vexed, he found an eviler thing. Through chapter after chapter, he is worried by the one event that cometh to all alike. So Omar, so I, so you, even you. For you rebelled against dying when Cookie sharpened a knife for you. You were afraid to die. The life that was in you, that composes you, that is greater than you, did not want to die. You have talked of the instinct of immortality. I talk of the instinct of life, which is to live, and which, when death looms near and large, masters the instinct, so-called, of immortality. It mastered it in you. You cannot deny it. Because a crazy Cockney cook sharpened a knife. You are afraid of him now. You are afraid of me. You cannot deny it. If I should catch you by the throat, thus. His hand was about my throat, and my breath was shut off, and began to press the life out of you thus, and thus, your instinct of immortality will go glimmering, and your instinct of life, which is longing for life, will flutter up, and you will struggle to save yourself. Hey, I see the fear of death in your eyes. You beat the air with your arms. You exert all your puny strength to struggle to live. Your hand is clutching my arm. Lightly it feels as a butterfly resting there. Your chest is heaving, your tongue protruding, your skin turning dark, your eyes swimming. To live, to live, to live. You are crying, and you are crying to live here and now, not hereafter. You doubt your immortality. Ha. You are not sure of it. You won't chance it. This life only you are certain is real. Ah, it is growing dark and darker. It is the darkness of death, the ceasing to be, the ceasing to feel, the ceasing to move, that is gathering about you, descending upon you, rising around you. Your eyes are becoming set. They are glazing. My voice sounds faint and far. You cannot see my face, and still you struggle in my grip. You kick with your legs. Your body draws itself up in knots like a snake's. Your chest heaves and strains. To live, to live, to live. I heard no more. Consciousness was blotted out by the darkness he had so graphically described. And when I came to myself, I was lying on the floor, and he was smoking a cigar and regarding me thoughtfully with that old familiar light of curiosity in his eyes. "Well, have I convinced you?" he demanded. "Here, take a drink of this. I want to ask you some questions." I rolled my head negatively on the floor. "Your arguments are too forcible," I managed to articulate, at cost of great pain to my aching throat. "You'll be all right in half an hour," he assured me, "and I promise I won't use any more physical demonstrations. Get up now. You can sit on a chair." And, toy that I was of this monster, the discussion of Omar and the preacher was resumed, and half the night we sat up over it. Chapter 12. The last 24 hours have witnessed a carnival of brutality. From cabin to forecastle, it seems to have broken out like a contagion. I scarcely know where to begin. Wolf Larsen was really the cause of it. The relations among the men, strained and made tense by feuds, quarrels and grudges, were in a state of unstable equilibrium, and evil passions flared up in flame like prairie grass. Thomas Mugridge is a sneak, a spy, an informer. He has been attempting to curry favor and reinstate himself in the good graces of the captain by carrying tales of the men forward. He it was, I know, that carried some of Johnson's hasty talk to Wolf Larsen. Johnson, it seems, bought a suit of oilskins from the slop chest and found them to be of greatly inferior quality. Nor was he slow in advertising the fact. The slop chest is a sort of miniature dry goods store, which is carried by all sealing schooners, and which is stocked with articles peculiar to the needs of the sailors. Whatever a sailor purchases is taken from his subsequent earnings on the sealing grounds. For, as it is with the hunters, so it is with the boat pullers and steerers in the place of wages. They receive a lay, a rate of so much per skin for every skin captured in their particular boat. But of Johnson's grumbling at the slop chest I knew nothing, so that what I witnessed came with a shock of sudden surprise. I had just finished sweeping the cabin, and had been inveigled by Wolf Larsen into a discussion of Hamlet, his favorite Shakespearean character, when Johansen descended the companion stairs, followed by Johnson. The latter's cap came off after the custom of the sea, and he stood respectfully in the center of the cabin, swaying heavily and uneasily to the roll of the schooner and facing the captain. "Shut the doors and draw the slide," Wolf Larsen said to me. As I obeyed, I noticed an anxious light come into Johnson's eyes, but I did not dream of its cause. I did not dream of what was to occur until it did occur. But he knew from the very first what was coming, and awaited it bravely. And in his action, I found complete refutation of all Wolf Larsen's materialism. The sailor Johnson was swayed by idea, by principle, and truth, and sincerity. He was right. He knew he was right. And he was unafraid. He would die for the right, if needs be. He would be true to himself, sincere with his soul. And in this was portrayed the victory of the spirit over the flesh, the indomitability and moral grandeur of the soul that knows no restriction and rises above time and space and matter with a surety and invincibleness born of nothing else than eternity and immortality, but to return. I noticed the anxious light in Johnson's eyes, but mistook it for the native shyness and embarrassment of the man. The mate, Johansen, stood away several feet to the side of him, and fully 3 yards in front of him sat Wolf Larsen on one of the pivotal cabin chairs. An appreciable pause fell after I had closed the doors and drawn the slide, a pause that must have lasted fully a minute. It was broken by Wolf Larsen. "Janssen," he began. "My name is Johnson, sir," the sailor boldly corrected. "Well, Johnson? Then, damn you, can you guess why I have sent for you?" "Yes and no, sir," was the slow reply. "My work is done well. The mate knows that, and you know it, sir. So there cannot be any complaint." "And is that all?" Wolf Larsen queried, his voice soft and low and purring. "I know you have it in for me," Johnson continued with his unalterable and ponderous slowness. "You do not like me. You. Go on," Wolf Larsen prompted. "Don't be afraid of my feelings." "I am not afraid," the sailor retorted, a slight angry flush rising through his sunburn. "If I speak not fast, it is because I have not been from the old country as long as you. You do not like me because I am too much of a man. That is why, sir, you are too much of a man for ship discipline, if that is what you mean, and if you know what I mean," was Wolf Larsen's retort. "I know English, and I know what you mean, sir," Johnson answered, his flush deepening at the slur on his knowledge of the English language. "Johnson," Wolf Larsen said, with an air of dismissing all that had gone before as introductory to the main business in hand. "I understand you're not quite satisfied with those oilskins." "No, I am not. They are no good, sir, and you've been shooting off your mouth about them." "I say what I think, sir," the sailor answered courageously, not failing at the same time in ship courtesy, which demanded that sir be appended to each speech he made. It was at this moment that I chanced to glance at Johansen. His big fists were clenching and unclenching, and his face was positively fiendish. So malignantly did he look at Johnson. I noticed a black discoloration, still faintly visible, under Johansen's eye, a mark of the thrashing he had received a few nights before from the sailor. For the first time, I began to divine that something terrible was about to be enacted. What? I could not imagine. "Do you know what happens to men who say what you've said about my slop chest and me?" Wolf Larsen was demanding. "I know, sir," was the answer. What Wolf Larsen demanded, sharply and imperatively. "What you and the mate there are going to do to me, sir, look at him. Hump." Wolf Larsen said to me, "Look at this bit of animated dust, this aggregation of matter that moves and breathes and defies me and thoroughly believes itself to be compounded of something good. That is impressed with certain human fictions, such as righteousness and honesty, and that will live up to them in spite of all personal discomforts and menaces. What do you think of him? Hump, what do you think of him?" "I think that he is a better man than you are," I answered, impelled, somehow, with a desire to draw upon myself a portion of the wrath I felt was about to break upon his head. His human fictions, as you choose to call them, make for nobility and manhood. You have no fictions, no dreams, no ideals. You are a pauper." He nodded his head with a savage pleasantness. "Quite true." "Hump. Quite true. I have no fictions that make for nobility and manhood. A living dog is better than a dead lion, say I with the preacher. My only doctrine is the doctrine of expediency, and it makes for surviving. This bit of the ferment we call Johnson, when he is no longer a bit of the ferment, only dust and ashes, will have no more nobility than any dust and ashes, while I shall still be alive and roaring." "Do you know what I am going to do?" he questioned. I shook my head. "Well, I am going to exercise my prerogative of roaring and show you how fares nobility. Watch me." 3 yards away from Johnson, he was, and sitting down, 9 feet, and yet he left the chair in full leap, without first gaining a standing position. He left the chair, just as he sat in it, squarely, springing from the sitting posture like a wild animal, a tiger, and like a tiger covered the intervening space. It was an avalanche of fury that Johnson strove vainly to fend off. He threw one arm down to protect the stomach, the other arm up to protect the head. But Wolf Larsen's fist drove midway between, on the chest, with a crushing, resounding impact. Johnson's breath, suddenly expelled, shot from his mouth and as suddenly checked, with the forced, audible expiration of a man wielding an axe. He almost fell backward and swayed from side to side in an effort to recover his balance. I cannot give the further particulars of the horrible scene that followed. It was too revolting. It turns me sick even now when I think of it. Johnson fought bravely enough, but he was no match for Wolf Larsen, much less for Wolf Larsen and the mate. It was frightful. I had not imagined a human being could endure so much and still live and struggle on Johnson did. Of course there was no hope for him, not the slightest, and he knew it as well as I. But by the manhood that was in him, he could not cease from fighting for that manhood. It was too much for me to witness. I felt that I should lose my mind, and I ran up the companion stairs to open the doors and escape on deck. But Wolf Larsen, leaving his victim for the moment, and with one of his tremendous springs, gained my side and flung me into the far corner of the cabin. The phenomena of life. Hump. He girded at me. Stay and watch it. You may gather data on the immortality of the soul. Besides, you know, we can't hurt Johnson's soul. It's only the fleeting form we may demolish. It seemed centuries, possibly. It was no more than 10 minutes that the beating continued. Wolf Larsen and Johansson were all about the poor fellow. They struck him with their fists, kicked him with their heavy shoes, knocked him down, and dragged him to his feet to knock him down again. His eyes were blinded so that he could not see, and the blood running from ears and nose and mouth turned the cabin into a shambles. And when he could no longer rise, they still continued to beat and kick him where he lay there. Easy, Johansson, easy as she goes, Wolf Larsen finally said. But the beast in the mate was up and rampant, and Wolf Larsen was compelled to brush him away with a backhanded sweep of the arm. Gentle enough, apparently, but which hurled Johansson back like a cork, driving his head against the wall with a crash. He fell to the floor, half stunned for the moment, breathing heavily and blinking his eyes in a stupid sort of way. "Jerk open the doors. Hump," I was commanded. I obeyed, and the two brutes picked up the senseless man like a sack of rubbish and hove him clear up the companion stairs, through the narrow doorway, and out on deck. The blood from his nose gushed in a scarlet stream over the feet of the helmsman, who was none other than Louis, his boatmate. But Louis took and gave a spoke and gazed imperturbably into the binnacle. Not so was the conduct of George Leach, the erstwhile cabin boy. Fore and aft, there was nothing that could have surprised us more than his consequent behavior. He it was that came up on the poop without orders and dragged Johnson forward, where he set about dressing his wounds as well as he could and making him comfortable. Johnson, as Johnson, was unrecognizable, and not only that, for his features, as human features at all, were unrecognizable. So discolored and swollen had they become in the few minutes which had elapsed between the beginning of the beating and the dragging forward of the body. But of Leach's behavior. By the time I had finished cleansing the cabin, he had taken care of Johnson. I had come up on deck for a breath of fresh air and to try to get some repose for my overwrought nerves. Wolf Larsen was smoking a cigar and examining the patent log which the Ghost usually towed astern, but which had been hauled in for some purpose. Suddenly, Leach's voice came to my ears. It was tense and hoarse, with an overmastering rage. I turned and saw him standing just beneath the break of the poop on the port side of the galley. His face was convulsed and white. His eyes were flashing, his clenched fists raised overhead. May God damn your soul to hell. Wolf Larsen. Only hell's too good for you. You coward. You murderer. You pig was his opening salutation. I was thunderstruck. I looked for his instant annihilation. But it was not Wolf Larsen's whim to annihilate him. He sauntered slowly forward to the break of the poop and, leaning his elbow on the corner of the cabin, gazed down thoughtfully and curiously at the excited boy. And the boy indicted Wolf Larsen as he had never been indicted before. The sailors assembled in a fearful group just outside the forecastle scuttle and watched and listened. The hunters piled pell-mell out of the steerage. But as Leach's tirade continued, I saw that there was no levity in their faces. Even they were frightened, not at the boy's terrible words, but at his terrible audacity. It did not seem possible that any living creature could thus beard Wolf Larsen in his teeth. I know for myself that I was shocked into admiration of the boy, and I saw in him the splendid invincibleness of immortality rising above the flesh and the fears of the flesh, as in the prophets of old, to condemn unrighteousness. And such condemnation he haled forth Wolf Larsen's soul, naked to the scorn of men. He rained upon it curses from God and high heaven, and withered it with a heat of invective that savored of a medieval excommunication of the Catholic Church. He ran the gamut of denunciation, rising to heights of wrath that were sublime and almost godlike, and from sheer exhaustion sinking to the vilest and most indecent abuse. His rage was a madness. His lips were flecked with a soapy froth, and sometimes he choked and gurgled and became inarticulate, and through it all, calm and impassive, leaning on his elbow and gazing down, Wolf Larsen seemed lost in a great curiosity. This wild stirring of yeasty life, this terrific revolt and defiance of matter that moved, perplexed and interested him. Each moment I looked, and everybody looked, for him to leap upon the boy and destroy him. But it was not his whim. His cigar went out, and he continued to gaze silently and curiously. Leech had worked himself into an ecstasy of impotent rage. "Pig, pig, pig," he was reiterating at the top of his lungs. "Why don't you come down and kill me, you murderer? You can do it. I ain't afraid. There's no one to stop you. Damn sight better dead and out of your reach than alive and in your clutches. Come on, you coward, kill me. Kill me. Kill me." It was at this stage that Thomas Mugridge's erratic soul brought him into the scene. He had been listening at the galley door, but he now came out, ostensibly to fling some scraps over the side, but obviously to see the killing he was certain would take place. He smirked greasily up into the face of Wolf Larsen, who seemed not to see him, but the Cockney was unabashed, though mad, stark mad. He turned to Leech, saying, "Such language shockin'." Leech's rage was no longer impotent. Here at last was something ready to hand. And for the first time since the stabbing, the Cockney had appeared outside the galley without his knife. The words had barely left his mouth when he was knocked down by Leech. 3 times he struggled to his feet, striving to gain the galley, and each time was knocked down. "Oh, Lord," he cried. "Elp, elp, tyke him away. Carn't yer tyke him away?" The hunters laughed from sheer relief. Tragedy had dwindled. The farce had begun. The sailors now crowded boldly aft, grinning and shuffling, to watch the pummeling of the hated Cockney. And even I felt a great joy surge up within me. I confess that I delighted in this beating Leech was giving to Thomas Mugridge, though it was as terrible, almost, as the one Mugridge had caused to be given to Johnson. But the expression of Wolf Larsen's face never changed. He did not change his position either, but continued to gaze down with a great curiosity. For all his pragmatic certitude, it seemed as if he watched the play and movement of life in the hope of discovering something more about it, of discerning in its maddest writhings a something which had hitherto escaped him, the key to its mystery, as it were, which would make all clear and plain. But the beating, it was quite similar to the one I had witnessed in the cabin. The Cockney strove in vain to protect himself from the infuriated boy, and in vain he strove to gain the shelter of the cabin. He rolled toward it, groveled toward it, fell toward it when he was knocked down, but blow followed blow with bewildering rapidity. He was knocked about like a shuttlecock, until, finally, like Johnson, he was beaten and kicked as he lay helpless on the deck, and no one interfered. Leech could have killed him, but, having evidently filled the measure of his vengeance, he drew away from his prostrate foe, who was whimpering and wailing in a puppyish sort of way, and walked forward. But these 2 affairs were only the opening events of the day's program. In the afternoon, Smoke and Henderson fell foul of each other, and a fusillade of shots came up from the steerage, followed by a stampede of the other 4 hunters for the deck. A column of thick, acrid smoke, the kind always made by black powder, was arising through the open companionway, and down through it leaped Wolf Larsen. The sound of blows and scuffling came to our ears. Both men were wounded, and he was thrashing them both for having disobeyed his orders and crippled themselves in advance of the hunting season. In fact, they were badly wounded, and, having thrashed them, he proceeded to operate upon them in a rough surgical fashion and to dress their wounds. I served as assistant while he probed and cleansed the passages made by the bullets. and I saw the two men endure his crude surgery without anesthetics and with no more to uphold them than a stiff tumbler of whiskey. Then, in the first dog watch, trouble came to a head in the forecastle. It took its rise out of the tittle-tattle and tale-bearing which had been the cause of Johnson's beating, and from the noise we heard, and from the sight of the bruised men next day, it was patent that half the forecastle had soundly drubbed the other half. The second dog watch and the day were wound up by a fight between Johansen and the lean, Yankee-looking hunter, Latimer. It was caused by remarks of Latimer's concerning the noises made by the mate in his sleep, and though Johansen was whipped, he kept the steerage awake for the rest of the night while he blissfully slumbered and fought the fight over and over again. As for myself, I was oppressed with nightmare. The day had been like some horrible dream. Brutality had followed brutality, and flaming passions and cold-blooded cruelty had driven men to seek one another's lives and to strive to hurt and maim and destroy. My nerves were shocked. My mind itself was shocked. All my days had been passed in comparative ignorance of the animality of man. In fact, I had known life only in its intellectual phases. Brutality I had experienced, but it was the brutality of the intellect, the cutting sarcasm of Charlie Furuseth, the cruel epigrams and occasional harsh witticisms of the fellows at the Bibelot, and the nasty remarks of some of the professors during my undergraduate days. That was all. But that men should wreak their anger on others by the bruising of the flesh and the letting of blood was something strangely and fearfully new to me. Not for nothing had I been called Sissy Van Weyden, I thought, as I tossed restlessly on my bunk between one nightmare and another. And it seemed to me that my innocence of the realities of life had been complete indeed. I laughed bitterly to myself, and seemed to find in Wolf Larsen's forbidding philosophy a more adequate explanation of life than I found in my own. And I was frightened when I became conscious of the trend of my thought. The continual brutality around me was degenerative in its effect. It bid fair to destroy for me all that was best and brightest in life. My reason dictated that the beating Thomas Mugridge had received was an ill thing, and yet for the life of me, I could not prevent my soul joying in it. And even while I was oppressed by the enormity of my sin, for sin it was, I chuckled with an insane delight. I was no longer Humphrey van Weyden. I was Hump, cabin boy on the schooner Ghost. Wolf Larsen was my captain. Thomas Mugridge and the rest were my companions, and I was receiving repeated impresses from the die which had stamped them all. Chapter 13. For 3 days I did my own work, and Thomas Mugridge's too, and I flatter myself that I did his work well. I know that it won Wolf Larsen's approval, while the sailors beamed with satisfaction during the brief time my regime lasted. The first clean bite since I come aboard, Harrison said to me at the galley door, as he returned the dinner pots and pans from the forecastle. Somehow, Tommy's grub always tastes of grease, stale grease, and I reckon he ain't changed his shirt since he left Frisco. I know he hasn't, I answered. And I'll bet he sleeps in it, Harrison added. And you won't lose. I agreed. The same shirt. And he hasn't had it off once in all this time. But 3 days was all Wolf Larsen allowed him in which to recover from the effects of the beating. On the 4th day, lame and sore, scarcely able to see, so closed were his eyes, he was haled from his bunk by the nape of the neck and set to his duty. He sniffled and wept, but Wolf Larsen was pitiless. "And see that you serve no more slops," was his parting injunction. "No more grease and dirt, mind, and a clean shirt occasionally, or you'll get a toe over the side. Understand?" Thomas Mugridge crawled weakly across the galley floor, and a short lurch of the ghost sent him staggering. In attempting to recover himself, he reached for the iron railing which surrounded the stove and kept the pots from sliding off, but he missed the railing, and his hand, with his weight behind it, landed squarely on the hot surface. There was a sizzle and odor of burning flesh, and a sharp cry of pain. "Oh, God, God, what have I done?" he wailed, sitting down in the coal box and nursing his new hurt by rocking back and forth. "We has all this come on me. It makes me fair sick. It does. And I try so hard to go through life harmless and hurtin' nobody." The tears were running down his puffed and discolored cheeks, and his face was drawn with pain. A savage expression flitted across it. "Oh? Ow, I ate him. Ow, I ate him," he gritted out. Whom I asked, but the poor wretch was weeping again over his misfortunes. Less difficult it was to guess whom he hated than whom he did not hate, for I had come to see a malignant devil in him, which impelled him to hate all the world. I sometimes thought that he hated even himself. So grotesquely had life dealt with him, and so monstrously. At such moments a great sympathy welled up within me, and I felt shame that I had ever joyed in his discomfiture or pain. Life had been unfair to him. It had played him a scurvy trick when it fashioned him into the thing he was, and it had played him scurvy tricks ever since. What chance had he to be anything else than he was? And as though answering my unspoken thought, he wailed, "I never had no chance. Not 'arf a chance 'oo was there to send me to school, or put Tommy in my 'ungry belly, or wipe my bloody nose for me. When I was a kiddie, who ever did anything for me? Who? I see. Never mind. Tommy," I said, placing a soothing hand on his shoulder. "Cheer up. It'll all come right in the end. You've long years before you, and you can make anything you please of yourself." "It's a lie, a bloody lie," he shouted in my face, flinging off the hand. "It's a lie, and you know it. I'm already mied, and mied out of leavin's and scraps. It's all right for you." You was born a gentleman. You never knew what it was to go hungry, to cry yourself asleep with your little belly gnawin' and gnawin', like a rat inside yer. It can't come right. If I was president of the United States tomorrow, how would it fill my belly for one time when I was a kiddie and it went empty? How could it? I see I was born to sufferin' and sorrer. I've had more cruel sufferin' than any 10 men. I've been in orspital arf my bleedin' life. I've had the fever in Aspinwall, in Havana, in New Orleans. I near died of the scurvy and was rotten with it 6 months in Barbados. Smallpox in Honolulu, 2 broken legs in Shanghai, pneumonia in Unalaska, 3 busted ribs and my insides all twisted in Frisco. And here I am now. Look at me. Look at me. My ribs kicked loose from my back again. I'll be coughin' blood before 8 bells. How can it be mied up to me? I arsk, who's going to do it? God, how God must have aided me when he signed me on for a voyage in this bloomin' world of his. This tirade against destiny went on for an hour or more, and then he buckled to his work, limping and groaning, and in his eyes a great hatred for all created things. His diagnosis was correct. however, for he was seized with occasional sicknesses, during which he vomited blood and suffered great pain. And as he said, it seemed God hated him too much to let him die, for he ultimately grew better and waxed more malignant than ever. Several days more passed before Johnson crawled on deck and went about his work in a half-hearted way. He was still a sick man, and I more than once observed him creeping painfully aloft to a topsail, or drooping wearily as he stood at the wheel. But, still worse, it seemed that his spirit was broken. He was abject before Wolf Larsen, and almost groveled to Johansen. Not so was the conduct of Leach. He went about the deck like a tiger cub, glaring his hatred openly at Wolf Larsen and Johansen. "I'll do for you yet, you slab-footed Swede," I heard him say to Johansen one night on deck. The mate cursed him in the darkness, and the next moment some missile struck the galley a sharp rap. There was more cursing, and a mocking laugh, and when all was quiet, I stole outside and found a heavy knife embedded over an inch in the solid wood. A few minutes later, the mate came fumbling about in search of it, but I returned it privily to Leach next day. He grinned when I handed it over, yet it was a grin that contained more sincere thanks than a multitude of the verbosities of speech common to the members of my own class. Unlike anyone else in the ship's company, I now found myself with no quarrels on my hands and in the good graces of all. The hunters possibly no more than tolerated me, though none of them disliked me, while Smoke and Henderson, convalescent under a deck awning and swinging day and night in their hammocks, assured me that I was better than any hospital nurse, and that they would not forget me at the end of the voyage when they were paid off. As though I stood in need of their money, who could have bought them out, bag and baggage, and the schooner and its equipment, a score of times over. But upon me had devolved the task of tending their wounds and pulling them through, and I did my best by them. Wolf Larsen underwent another bad attack of headache, which lasted 2 days. He must have suffered severely, for he called me in and obeyed my commands like a sick child, but nothing I could do seemed to relieve him. At my suggestion, however, he gave up smoking and drinking, though why such a magnificent animal as he should have headaches at all puzzles me. 'Tis the hand of God, I'm telling you, is the way Louis sees it. 'Tis a visitation for his black-hearted deeds, and there's more behind and comin'. Or else, I prompted. God is noddin' and not doin' his duty, though it's me as shouldn't say it. I was mistaken when I said that I was in the good graces of all. Not only does Thomas Mugridge continue to hate me, but he has discovered a new reason for hating me. It took me no little while to puzzle it out, but I finally discovered that it was because I was more luckily born than he gentleman born. He put it, and still no more dead men. I twitted Lewis when Smoke and Henderson, side by side, in friendly conversation, took their first exercise on deck. Louis surveyed me with his shrewd gray eyes and shook his head portentously. "She's a-comin', I tell you, and it'll be sheets and halyards. Stand by all hands when she begins to howl. I've had the feel of it this long time, and I can feel it now as plainly as I feel the rigging of a dark night. She's close. She's close." "Who goes first?" I queried. "Not fat old Louis, I promise you," he laughed. "For 'tis in the bones of me. I know that come this time next year I'll be gazin' in the old mother's eyes, weary with watchin' of the sea for the 5 sons she gave to it." "What's he been seein' to yer?" Thomas Mugridge demanded a moment later. That he's going home someday to see his mother. I answered diplomatically. I never had none, was the Cockney's comment, as he gazed with lusterless, hopeless eyes into mine.